Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Sorry for the momentary lapse as we were getting everything situated. Link problems and multitasking. So here we go. Tanya, if you want to go to our agenda. Okay, so we want to just start today with a little bit of review of what we learned last time for anybody who wasn't with us, but also to remind people who were with us. We're going to start with that this morning or this afternoon. We're going to move forward to the alphabetic principle. We're going to talk about the importance of explicit, systematic, sequential instruction. Moving forward, we're going to connect the work that we've done so far with orthography. Tanya is going to take us through the developmental spelling progression. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we prompt readers. So we have a pretty lengthy agenda. We also have built an opportunity for you to actively engage in the session. So because we know we have a lot planned, if we don't get through it, we are meeting again in May, and we will continue with our work in May. So the next piece is that we just want to make sure that as you're here with us today, that you're keeping in mind these norms. So first, all of you are adults in the session. So we are reminding you that you are the catalyst for your own learning. And we're asking that you use the tools of virtual learning as much as possible. So cameras, microphones, chats, and that you take care of your personal needs too. Be the neighbor that Mr. Rogers would be proud of. We know that we're going to be stretching and learning as teachers and educators, so we can disagree and we can still be respectful as we're learning together. And then finally, we want to begin with a positive outlook on things. So Tanya, if you want to click, our last norm is what's the best that could happen. So use this time together today to try new things and stretch yourselves as a teacher, learner, and colleague. Our work today is grounded in research-based instructional strategies, instructional practices. So last time we focused a lot on Essential 4, and we're moving and connecting that work today to Essential 5. So explicit instruction in letter-sound relationships. So Essential 4, when we were talking about Essential 4, we talked about the simple view of reading, and then we moved into discussing Scarborough's rope, especially with attention to phonological awareness. So what we're going to ask you to do right now, I'm going to put in the chat 3 questions, and we're going to ask that you think about these questions as we move into breakout rooms. We're going to have about 3 minutes in these breakout rooms. Nothing is going as planned. Okay, here we go. So here are 3 questions that we're going to be discussing today. What are some of the ideas that you carried forward from the first session? And then what are some ideas from the first session that you explored in order to learn more? And then what are some things that you've tried with a student since our first session? And if you weren't with us in our first session, that's okay. We are hoping that you'll be in a room with other people who were, and they can share their learning with you. So Erica, I'm not sure if
I have them ready. Are you ready to start the timer?
Yes, so go ahead and take a look at those questions in the chat, and we're going to have 3 minutes, so that's about 1 minute per person to share their thinking, and we'll see you back here in a few minutes.
Okay, they are open. If anybody has trouble getting in there, just let me know.
Okay, and I'm going to pause our recording while we do that. Welcome back from breakout rooms. We hope that gave you just an opportunity to kind of put the information that we shared last time at the front of your minds as we move forward. So I'm going to have Tanya reshare. Oh, your little boxes in the middle. Maybe it's not now. Okay. So this was the slide we just talked about. So last time we talked about the simple view of reading and Scarborough's rope, especially the lens of phonological awareness. So hopefully in your breakout rooms, you had an opportunity to talk about those pieces. Today we want to introduce you to some work. This is an hourglass figure, and this figure was created by Carol A. Tolman. And what this hourglass depicts is the instructional progression by which speech sound awareness becomes the foundation for learning orthography. So the top part that we're focusing on today depicts the oral language competence, and the under part, the lower part, Tanya is going to talk about a little bit later, is orthography. And what happens is that these two pieces happen in parallel. These two pieces happen in parallel. They're not happening one before the other, but they're happening in parallel with one another. And so we're going to learn a little bit more about the progression by which students learn about print and what happens as they continue to develop. A special note I want to mention is this waist of the hourglass, or this middle piece of the hourglass that is highlighted in yellow, is where we find the alphabetic principle. So this is the connection of letters and sounds. Erica also has just put in the chat a handout for today and the PDF of the slides. So you'll be able to refer back to these pieces. The alphabetic principle is the understanding that there are systematic and predictable relationships between written letters and spoken sounds. So phonics instruction helps students learn about these relationships between the symbols or letters and the sounds that are spoken in language. So connecting those symbols and their sounds when we read and write is called the alphabetic principle. So if you look at the slide, you can see that the word dog, D-O-G, is written on cards, and we're connecting those symbols with the sounds below. So what we want to do is we want to explicitly, systematically, and sequentially teach students how to break the code by using the top and the bottom of the hourglass. So we're using what students know about phonological awareness and oral language, and we're connecting that with the symbols of letters so that they can put those pieces together and blend to decode words. So you can see this puzzle kind of gives us an image of those two pieces working together in order to decode and read words. So we're going to do a little activity with this video, and so we're going to ask for you to actively participate while the video is playing and follow along with what the person in the video is asking you to do. So you're going to go through an experience of learning to read a language called Phoenician.
So let's do another little activity. We're going to practice our decoding. And here is a new alphabetic system called Phoenician. And if you take a look here, we have different symbols that map to the different sounds. And what you're seeing here is the word kit, or the name kit. I'm giving you the secret that in Phoenician, we read from right to left. So let's go ahead and try and apply what we know about mapping sounds to symbols to read this sentence. And I will give you a few minutes to do that.
If you're on your phone, this might be small, but since you've been given the slides, you might go back and do this later. But for everyone else, it'd be great if you could follow along.
All right, couple more seconds. All right, I see that some people put it in the chat. Yes, it's kit, ran, and hid. So we just wanted to put you back in the place where you're learning sound symbol correspondence for the first time, and how it really it's tricky when you're learning that new symbol system. So that's what our students are feeling like on a regular basis as they're learning to read.
Sorry, I was muted. So we put some questions in the chat. We want to give you just a couple of minutes to think about what students might have been feeling. And so if you had any thoughts or ideas while you were going through this activity about what kinds of thoughts or feelings came up when you were decoding, what steps or resources did you use, or how did this help you to understand readers who are learning that sound symbol system for the first time? So if you want to go ahead and put any of those ideas in the chat, we're going to continue to think about how we can have empathy for our students as they're learning. Yeah, it's slow. That's what I thought too when I was doing it. Lots of mental energy, frustration. Not enough time. Yeah, and then reading directionality can be challenging. Forgetting what you read to put the whole sentence together. So lots of things that are happening as students are learning, overwhelming, yeah, as students are learning to read and making those connections. So this is why it's really,
sorry.
So let's do another little activity.
So this is why it's really important that we have a particular kind of instruction that is going to be supportive of our students as they're learning these sound symbol connections. So it's really important that we have explicit instruction. Explicit instruction is fully and clearly defined, and it explains or demystifies the information that students are given. The teacher states what is expected and uses routines to support and ensure learning. And students are constantly assessed during this process so that their individualized needs can be met. The next piece of instruction or kind of instruction that's really important is systematic. So in a systematic kind of instruction, what that means is that routines and procedures are carried out in a step-by-step manner. Systematic means having to do with systems. So in this case, the system is the correspondence between speech and print, and it ensures that all concepts are explained, practiced, and generalized. And again, learning is continually evaluated so that teachers can respond to the needs of the learners. And finally, we want to ensure that our instruction is sequential. So it's pre-planned and there is a sequence with cumulative instruction building from one skill to the next skill, and that scope and sequence covers things that are specified so that teachers and students know where they've been and where they're headed. So we want to have all three of these pieces. Explicit, systematic, and sequential instruction is almost always the best approach for serving the needs of all students. And the reason why this sentence says almost always is because we know that there is a very slim number of students who come to us as conventional readers and pick up this code almost automatically. But for the majority of our learners, it is crucial that they have instruction that is explicit, systematic, and sequential. For those few students who might not need this, assessment is going to reveal the place in the progression where we would want to start with them.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about really focusing on some of that systematic and sequential parts of the instruction by looking at the alphabetic principle for English in depth. So last time when we talked about phonological awareness, we talked about how students needed to build skills, and the more difficult skills were actually dealing with the individual phonemes, that smallest unit. And so today we're going to be looking at orthography, and what this hourglass does on the orthography side of it is that it shows how the symbols that we associate with the sounds and that represent the sounds also build in complexity. So we have graphemes, which are our letters. We have digraphs, which is, and with a grapheme, that symbol represents one sound. A digraph represents one sound, but the symbol is made up of two letters. So that's like CH, making the ch sound. Trigraphs have 3 letters that make one sound. We talk about vowel teams, where we have 2 vowels together that are, they're sometimes called vowel digraphs too, because they work together to make that one sound. Blends are 2 sounds, but they're blended together, which makes it tricky for some students to isolate those sounds. We talk about families. So again, we're looking at bigger and bigger chunks of the code. So those are word families and patterns that students start to see and recognize. Syllables, we're looking at chunks of words. Beginning readers usually focus on 1-syllable words, and then as they grow in their skills, they expand that out. A morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning in a word. And so some words have just 1 morpheme. For example, the word dog has 1 morpheme. It means the animal. But if you say dogs, there are 2 morphemes, because we have dog, meaning the animal, and then that S at the end, which means more than 1. So those are parts of the word. And then etymology is important. That talks about the background, kind of where the word came from and the roots of the word. And that actually informs quite a bit of the way our symbol system, our orthography works in English. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So again, last week we talked about the helping kids get the skills to see kind of increasingly smaller units down to the phoneme level in sound and manipulating them. And now we're going to talk about how we help kids to recognize increasingly more complex patterns in order to decode. So one note about this hourglass is that while things do kind of lead or follow in complexity, this isn't prerequisites. So it's not like you have to teach one fully before going to the next, but like the hourglass and the sands that move, you're going to be bouncing back and forth. You're going to be dealing with phonemic awareness and sounds. There are some morphemes, like the plural ending, it makes sense to teach earlier, and others you may teach later. And so this is fluid and flexible. It's not meant to be seen as something that goes lockstep. I see someone said getting out my glossary, and there is a glossary that's linked in the resources, the handout for today. And so these words can seem overwhelming at first, but like any set of vocabulary over time, it helps to, you learn it better, but also I think we can use morphology to understand some of these. So for example, graph means right. Di means 2, so a digraph is where we have 2 written symbols for 1 sound. A trigraph would have how many? I'm sure you know. So English orthography, which is the system that we use to represent our language, is considered very deep. And it helps to understand the history of English in order to better understand our orthography and why things are the way they are. So I'm going to play a short clip from a much longer video that I highly recommend. It's not much longer, it's about 10 minutes, but I highly recommend, that gives a little bit of a sense of why English orthography is the way it is.
Modern English, but thanks to the printing press, it was stuck with a spelling system that was based on Germanic roots, with a Latin script, using French spellings to describe Middle English pronunciations. Some have attempted to modernize English spelling, most notably Noah Webster, who in the early 1800s suggested a bunch of phonetically corrected changes. Some stuck, others did not.
Okay, so you may be having some thoughts about what this means for us for teaching English. And so we're going to give you a moment now to discuss that. So it is a complicated system here. And it has a rich history.
Yeah, it's really been influenced by lots of different languages.
Right. We do have many borrowed words that have come into our language. So when we think about, whoops, I'm sorry.
Modern English.
When we think about English orthography. One thing, when people have studied different languages with different, what they call the depth of orthography, or how complex it is, they found that English speaking groups need almost 2.5 years of learning, more than twice as much time as other other languages in order to establish minimal decoding. So if you look at this chart here, you can see that it looks at measuring words and non-word reading at the end of the first year of instruction in decoding. And the error percentage you can see for English is over 70% for non-words and about 65 for words. And that's significantly higher than other languages where the orthography is not as deep.
There is an article linked in the handout too. If this is intriguing to you, you can read more there.
Yes. So when we talk about orthographic depth, this is a chart that shows some of those languages that were shown there. And it goes from shallow to deep. And in Finnish, which you can see is at the shallow end, there are about 29 phonemes or sounds in a language, and there are also 29 letters. So it's pretty much one-to-one correspondence. And the way syllables are structured in Finnish is also simple. And so most Finnish children are able to decode pretty well at the end of 1 year of instruction. English, however, has 44 phonemes, 26 letters, and then 250 graphemes. The good news is that some of them are so rarely used that we really only need about 80. Students need to learn 80 graphemes or representations of sounds in order to be able to decode well. So when we think about English orthography or the way the print sounds represent it, we really think about the history over time, beginning with the Anglo-Saxon roots, and the words that we see that are still in our language from here are words that tend to represent things from nature, from family, and body parts, actions, and they tend to be one-syllable words, and they're fairly phonetically regular. So some linguists have said that children learning to write actually write like little Saxons. So they are very phonetic in their spelling, and that's pretty much how it was represented. With the arrival of the French with William the Conqueror and the French language, we began to incorporate more of the words. So our vocabulary expanded tremendously with some of these French words. And what you find that often the French word is like the fancy word. So they might buy versus purchase. An Anglo-Saxon person wore a shirt, and the French brought the blouse. And so with these new words, we also began incorporating some of the spelling patterns from French. That's where we get our soft and hard C and G. And that added complexity to our language. What's interesting too, though, is if you think of as children are beginning the process of reading and decoding, the books that they tend to be reading also follow this progression fairly well. So early on, we have a lot of familiar words and items and topics and one-syllable words. And then as they move forward, the words begin to be more varied and more complex and multi-syllable. And in the Renaissance, we really have a lot of these Greek and Latin words coming into play. They actually changed some of the spelling to better match the Greek and Latin origins. That's where we get our CH that can sound like a K. Many of these words are academic words that represent mathematics or scientific ideas. And these are often words that students see more towards middle school or late elementary for the most part. So this progression of English historically also matches a lot of what we see in the development of language. So with this super complex system, it seems overwhelming. And what we actually know, though, is that if you just follow the sound symbol association of the complete code, those 80 graphemes, about 50% of words are predictable. Then another 36, if you have a few rules, not a lot of rules, but few rules, those become predictable as well. Other irregular words, if you consider root of the word or the word origin, the they then become regular, and really there's only 4% of English words that are true oddities that don't have some sort of systematic explanation. I want you to think about what we just talked about the history of English orthography and English language, and also your experience when you attempted to become fluent in Phoenician. So you can share in the chat what you're thinking, or you can feel free to unmute yourself.
You can see Jen saying direct instruction, time to practice, patience, repetition. All of those things are really important for learners as they're developing this code.
I see that Anne said she has enough comprehension already to understand if she could learn the sound letter correlation. And Kristen also talked about understanding the sound of each symbol. And that brings us to kind of where we start with the code. Our students are, they have oral language in place. We've been working on phonemic awareness skills. And so now we are ready to help our students learn the symbols, the letters that come along with that. So we're starting to attach a grapheme, one single letter, to a phoneme, a particular sound. And so when we think about learning letters and sounds, we do know that the letters in a child's name, particularly those in the initial position, they tend to learn fastest and easiest, most likely because they've had the most exposure to those letters. After that, they learn letters easily when the name of the letter has the sound first. So words like B that starts with B and P that starts with P. Those are easier to learn than letters where the sound is in the second position. So for example, in F and M and R, we don't get the sound that goes with that letter till the end, and those tend to be a little trickier for students. Then we have the letters like H, W, and Y, where the sound doesn't occur in the name at all. And after that, our vowels, those are all over the place. So we see in the letter V, we have that long E in the last position. M has that short E in the first position. So the names of letters themselves can cause some confusion for students, but we do know from research it is helpful to teach them the letter names and the sounds together.
And
when
I was just going to say, you might be familiar with the article from Block and Duke called Letter Names Can Cause Confusion and Other Things to Know About Letter Sound Relationships, and that connects to this idea.
So in terms of letters and thinking about the sequence of where we start, there is no one right sequence. And so here I've shared a couple different examples. One is from Louisa Moats and the other is an Orton-Gillingham sequence. But what we should do is start with predictable consonants and short vowel sounds. When there are letters like B and D that look similar or have similar sounds, those should be separated in the instructional sequence so that you're not teaching them right next to each other, but you want to have one pretty solid before you introduce another one. And have combinations that allow students to start reading and writing and decoding and pretty early on. So you'll notice in the sequence under both of these, there is the opportunity to create simple words like CAD or COD or SAT in using these letters. And with letters and sounds, it's super important to remember the importance of phonemic awareness. If a student does not have strong phonemic awareness and the ability to isolate from a string of sounds to isolate individual sounds, the effect is basically these sounds kind of swirling around. And once phonemic awareness skills have been more developed, the sounds start to stabilize and line up more. And at that point, it's much easier to pin a symbol onto a sound if they're able to isolate it and recognize it. So that's an important thing to keep in mind with phonemic awareness and how it really helps to have phonemic awareness skills and these letter sound skills working together. So when we're learning sounds and symbols, it's based on a visual phonological paired associate learning. And when the brain is making these connections between the symbol that is the letter K, the sound K, and the letter name K, those are all connections that need to be made. And what we know is that it takes many more exposures at this sound symbol letter than it does later for word recognition. And it can take up to hundreds of exposures, even for a typically developing child. And so it's very important that we provide practice, and distributed practice is much more effective in this process of reviewing, practicing, recalling. It's better to have short practice sessions throughout the day rather than one long 20-minute practice. And I'm sure that makes sense just thinking about preschool and kindergarten students and their attention. But it also makes sense from a learning perspective to have those opportunities built out. When we're teaching these sounds and letters, we also want to work on blending them together and categorizing the letters as consonants and vowels. And this consonant and vowel knowledge is very important because as part of the alphabetical principle, a key thing to know is that every syllable has a vowel sound. Not a vowel as in a letter, but a vowel sound. And I realized this just a few years ago. I realized this even after I'd taken Orton Gillingham training and I knew a lot about different pieces of the code, but somehow like this simple concept was not something that had anchored for me. And once it was actually a speech path who mentioned this, and I was like, wow, that actually, it all really works now. So knowing that every single syllable in our language has a vowel sound in it is very important. And it's helpful because knowing that the number of vowel sounds, again, not the number of vowels, but the letters, but the vowel sounds in a word is the same as the number of syllables. So this is also helpful as students are reading longer and longer words to be able to break up words into syllables. And it also makes a lot of the other kind of things that can seem goofy about English orthography make a lot more sense. So if you take nothing else away from this today, these two things are critical. So in English orthography, we have this progression, this layering of the alphabet and the sounds. And then there are also patterns that come along with the way we use these sounds and building into more and more complex graphemes. And then meaning comes into place where we're creating words and morphemes, and we have prefixes and suffixes and how that works. And when you're looking at different ways of teaching English orthography or phonics, you'll find that there is a general progression. And while there might be some little differences, it all follows this general progression of the alphabet and the complexity of the graphemes, and then the patterns that we see within and across words and across syllables, and then how meaning comes into play once we have morphemes and then into roots and so forth. Again, this doesn't mean you have to go one lockstep to the other. You're going to have meaning when you address the ed ending, the past tense suffix, and how that maintains the spelling when you attach it to different words before you might teach other things. So you're gonna kind of be circling back and forth a little bit throughout, but this is a general progression that you'll see across most programs that are considered systematic. All right, so at the earliest stage here, we have the alphabetic, one letter, one sound. And you'll notice here that with our picture of the dog, we have the sounds d, ah, g, and then each of those sounds links to the one single letter that represents it. And this is the simplest letter, the simplest level of our English orthography, where it is one sound and one letter. And so they learn those and the short vowels. The next level of complexity are common consonant digraphs. So in the word ship, we have 4 letters, but we have 3 sounds, sh, I, p, and it's represented by those letters. So as students are learning this process, they're starting to map the sequence of sound with sequence of letters. There's like a spatial association that happens. And what brain studies have shown that's fascinating is that even when very adept adult readers are reading silently, the part of the brain that activates the speech and the motor, the way you shape your mouth is actually activated while you're reading. And so it's a see it, say it, and your brain is still saying it even if you aren't speaking the words aloud. So here again, with that idea of sequential sounds, the next level of complexity, and we get into some consonant blends. And these are tricky for students often because one blends into the other. And in terms of phonemic awareness, it takes a little bit more skill to separate those sounds out than to go from a consonant to a vowel. So you see words like stamp here. So again, 5 letters, 1 syllable, 5 sounds.
So we want to take a minute to kind of try this out. So we're going to use some prompts that are from an article that we have shared in the handout from Nell Duke about prompting young readers. So these are 3 of the areas of prompts. She actually talks about 5 in the article, but for today's purposes, we're going to use this handout on the right with these 3 different kinds of prompts. And what we would like for you to do is think about the text and the reader, and then look at the prompts to the right. And these are based on the most recent research. And then in the chat, we'd like for you to say how you might prompt this reader. So the text says, it is a sloth, but the reader says, it is a and then keeps going. How would you prompt this reader? So Jen and Anne say slide through each sound. So this reader, yeah. So this reader has mastered that, or at least is demonstrating that they understand that sound symbol correlation, but they aren't automatically blending those sounds together to form the words. So we would want to prompt them to do that work.
So building on this complexity here, there are some patterns with short vowels, with double consonants, are sometimes called short vowel protectors. And there are a few that students tend to see early on. So we have CK for the K sound, and the sometimes called the floss rule, FL, S, and Z, that are doubled at the end. And they tend to kind of accumulate this pretty quickly and see that doubling at the end and see that as a pattern. But they definitely benefit from having that explicitly taught, not just assuming they're going to pick it up. And it's also helpful to have this established early on, because as we'll see later, when there are multi-syllable words, there tend to be more reasons for these doubling pieces to happen. So another pattern that we teach fairly early on, especially in decoding rather than encoding, is that C and G can have 2 sounds. There's the hard G and K, and that is when G or C is followed by an A, O, or U. And then it's a soft J or S when it's followed by an I, E, or Y. So we have 2 examples here, G-E-L, because it's that E that follows it. We have the J sound, and it's J-E-L, gel. And then, although that is an exception to the floss rule, which that's where it gets tricky. But then gum has that U there, and so it's going to have G, so it's G, M. And the same thing happens with C. So with this rule now, this word has quite a controversial pronunciation. So if you could put in the chat, how do you pronounce this word? Do you pronounce it GIF or GIF? So if we look at our rule here, then that would be a soft G, a J, and it would be GIF. And so many people insist that it should be pronounced GIF. However, this word originated as an acronym for graphics interchange format way back in the computer days. And so because graphic has that hard G, many people would pronounce it GIF to kind of hold on to that meaning in the word. And actually the Oxford Dictionary will accept either pronunciation. So there is no one right answer, but definitely one that could go back and forth. We're all right, exactly. So building on with the pattern, we have the idea of open syllables and closed syllables. This is looking at patterns at the syllable level. And when a syllable ends with a vowel, then the vowel is long. It calls out its name. The door is open, it's calling its name out the door. And then when the syllable is closed, meaning that that vowel is in between two consonants, it's short, and it has the short sound. So we have the example here of high and hid. And this is nice to learn with single syllable words, and it becomes a lot, very important to know later with multi-syllable words. There are many long vowel sounds. And when we think about the those 80 graphemes that kids need to learn and those 44 sounds, there's a huge proportion of them that are vowels, and vowels represented with many different patterns. And so when you look at many progressions of these vowel teams, they usually start fairly early, but like second grade is pretty much the year of the vowel. With a lot of this and learning all of these different ways of representing it. So here, again, we have the word train, which is a one syllable word because it has one vowel sound, even though there are two vowel letters there. So again, what's helpful when they're learning these mapping processes is learning that every letter does not make a sound. There are clusters that are grouped together, and those letters together are a grapheme that make a single sound. Another pattern that they learn pretty early on is the silent E. And the silent E at the end of a word will make or after a consonant, makes the vowel before it a long vowel. And that's a pretty frequent pattern in English orthography.
So go ahead and take a look at that prompting. We're going to populate that prompting chart again on the right. And again, these are taken from the article that Nell published in December of 2020 in Educational Leadership that's linked in the handout. So the text says, "Go back to bed," said Mom. But the reader says, "Go back to bed," said Mom. How would you prompt this reader? And you can go ahead and populate the chat. Try a different sound. Anyone else have another idea? So one of the things that, if you read this article from Nell Duke, one of the things that we're finding out more and more, and it's always been a part of the research, but it's becoming even more apparent to us in the research, that it's really important that we still teach sight words phonetically and that we cue to orthography. So we're really cueing to the letters and sounds, and we're using meaning secondarily. So we're using meaning to cross-check or to for our comprehension. So kids, what we know is that kids automatically are making meaning. They're making meaning because of their exposure to oral language and their ability to communicate before they begin to understand the letter sound symbol correlation. So when we prompt, we want to first prompt for orthography or for the letters and sounds. So we would prompt, like you were saying, for try a different vowel sound. And we teach sight words, like said, the way we would teach any other word. So we're teaching the phonetic, we're teaching them phonetically. So we're teaching the to recognize that the S and the D are predictable and follow the patterns that we're familiar with S and D. And then we teach the unpredictable part by prompting for try a different sound. This can sometimes be an example of when kids are learning a generalization, they tend to overgeneralize, kind of like when we're teaching periods when we're writing and suddenly every word or letter even has a period. So we want to continue to go back and talk to kids about those vowel teams and those vowel combinations and how they can correctly identify these words. So depending on the development of the reader, we might ask them to slide through the sounds, but a more effective prompt would be to try a different vowel sound.
Jenny and Tanya, I see we have about 2 minutes left. And that's perfectly fine because we have another session in which our work can move forward. We want to continue to take you through the progression and then talk to you more about prompting, and then eventually talk more about when this all occurs, and a little bit more information for all of you. But I say for now, just so we have a moment to reflect, maybe we can move forward to slide 57 or 58, 56. I don't know, one of you decide where, how we can finish this off.
Yeah, let's move forward to slide 58. And on slide
So let's do
58,
another little activity.
sorry, we'll wait for Tanya to get there. That's okay. So what we're just asking for you to do now is to take a minute to just integrate this new knowledge, or knowledge that maybe wasn't new, but you're partnering with knowledge that you had before. We're just asking for you to name maybe an idea that you might share with a colleague from today's session. And we are going to continue with this information and along the lines of the development of the reader and speller. And we're going to continue to work with prompts in our next session. So if you're like, wait a minute, you haven't gotten to the development of the reader that I'm working with, we're going to get there in May in our next session. And I'll put that flyer in the chat for us. But if you could share in the chat one idea that you might share with a colleague that you heard today. So Anne, the complete article is linked, and we're going to continue to talk about it in the next session too, but in the handout, you'll find that article that has a lot of information. So also linked in the chart, the picture that you saw on the slide is available for you to print and cut into a half sheet. So a lot of teachers that I work with have printed that and then laminated it so they have it nearby so that it's easy to remember those prompts. Great. Yeah, the connection with phonological awareness and phonics is helpful. All right, well,
I just want to quickly, before we end, just share also, because it would be very helpful for those returning to kind of review some of these materials of the things we covered. So wanting to know more about some of the information that and history that Tanya shared. We have the rest of the video here, the Screwed Up History of English Spelling. This video, we have another video to share that's similar, but we really wanted to expose you to some information about Black English and how that plays a role in our classrooms, and lots of good information there with Dr. April Baker-Bell. And then, like, I know you guys might know a lot about the letter names can cause confusion and phonics faux pas, but right here, I just want to point out this article, which I found to be very helpful in ILA, which is when two vowels go walking, the first one doesn't necessarily do the talking, and limitations of broad phonics generalization. So just wanted to share that with you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to Jenny and to Tanya for a wonderful presentation, and hopefully we will see you all on our last session. Jenny, can you remind us when that is? Do you have that up?
Yes, I do. And I put it in the chat so everyone else can have that too and save it to your desktop. It is May 19th, and it will be from 4 to 5 o'clock.